Welcome, John Papola. Are you here?
I am.
Wonderful to have you.
Oh,
It is my great pleasure to introduce John Papola, father, filmmaker, serial entrepreneur, and CEO and co-founder of Emergent Order Foundation, a nonprofit studio dedicated to heroic storytelling that embodies classical virtues and promotes a culture of American freedom. As I mentioned earlier, he's also famous as the producer of the Hayek and Keynes video series. And I always like to mention the MTV background, so it kind of gives you that cool buzz in the background. And finally, Dad Saves America. I think it's a wonderful direction that you've turned in, John. I think this is one of the most important yet least recognized sort of directions for positive initiative in the United States today. So without further ado, take it away, John. Tell us what it's all about.
all right. Well, I'm going to share my screen a little bit here. I've got some slides because as the visual guy, I've got to. If I don't make it visual, I'm not doing my job. So give me just a second here. So there we are. So yeah, as Michael said, I'm going to share a little bit about my personal story, which is also the story of a lot of educational experimentation for my son. So, I personally found my passions outside of school from an early age. This is a picture of me and my, to this day, business partner, Josh, making a video in high school in my basement as an alternative to doing a traditional report for school. I loved producing videos and building, learning computer software to try to create graphics. I would spend all my time out of school doing that. And I mean, and here I am, this is what I do now. When I went to college, I started off in engineering because the high school guidance counselors didn't know what to do with me. My grades were all in math and science, but all I would talk about was wanting to do creative work. History and English and social studies, they all felt incredibly boring in school. I hated them, which is ironic by today's standards for how much I care about those subjects now. So this is me in film school. As Michael said, when I got out of school, I started to work at MTV. These are my original bosses at MTV Animation. I then worked at Nickelodeon, where I met my wife Lisa, and so I spent several years in kids entertainment. And then I moved to Spike TV, the first network for men. And while I was at Spike, I ran a program called True Dads, which was our sort of pro-social initiative dedicated to promoting active fatherhood, which, I never would have thought that 10 years later I would return to that with what we're doing today. While working at Spike, the financial crisis of 2008 happened, and I was a new dad with my first time apartment with my young family. And so for the first time, I really started to take an extreme interest in economics. I was always politically minded, but I never had an economics class of any formal kind. So I started teaching myself economics on the bus with my iPhone and podcasts like Russ Roberts' Econ Talk. And after several years of that, 2007 and 8, and then 2009, I reached out to Russ Roberts and said I wanted to make a video about what the free market economist Friedrich Hayek has to say about what we were all experiencing at that point, and frankly, what I think we're experiencing right now. The sort of easy money booms that plant the seeds of their own destruction and a bust. And so I ended up producing a series of rap videos, drawing on my experience at Nickelodeon and MTV together with my newfound interest in economics. And they ended up becoming incredibly broadly used, not just in college, which I would expect because the lyrics are very technical, but even in high school. I was sent videos of high school talent shows using, performing our videos. It was so gratifying. It was so exhilarating to be making a small contribution to economics education that it would ultimately change my life. Just one example of how far these videos went. Russ and I were invited to the Economist magazine's, annual conference, the Buttonwood Gathering, where we got up on stage with our actors, and in the audience were central bankers and the heads of major financial corporations and, sort of the who's who of finance. And here we were, talking about these things and I had no formal PhD, or I didn't even have so much as a bachelor's degree in econ. So that sort of planted the seeds for self-directed education for me as an adult. At the same time, I was noticing something was happening with my son's education. I had put him in a local Catholic school in Verona, New Jersey, and I noticed that his school made him miserable. And here he is being pulled into class from the principal, who had a classic Catholic school principal name. I think her name was Sister Mary Francis. And I went into her office and I asked her, because I noticed he was getting homework, and I saw the kindergarten teacher was really stressed out the kids, and it was all rigorous. And I put that in scare quotes very intentionally. And I met with the principal, and I said, I don't remember kindergarten being like this. I thought it was a place to socialize and start to interact with kids your age and do creative projects, and there wasn't an expectation that you would necessarily have to read or do any kind of worksheets or any of this stuff. It's terrible. And her response was, you're right. Kindergarten didn't used to be like this. And frankly, I don't like it either, but the parents demand that we keep up with the public school standards, and the public school standards have gotten more and more rigorous, which is to say more and more abusive to the young minds of children, and more bureaucratic and measurable in ways, measuring things that are of no consequence to the rest of your life. And for this all struck me at a deep level, but not so much at a conscious level. But this overlaid with us moving. So we started our company, Emergent Order. We moved to Texas, and so we noticed two things about what was happening with our son. One was the rigor of the school, and the other was, he's Gen Z, and he was getting access to my iPhone and iPads. And frankly, we were pretty lax about managing his screen time. And so he was becoming quite addicted to them, like grabbing at our pocket for the phone. And we didn't like that. So when we moved to Austin, we actually put him in the Austin Waldorf School, which really sort of looked like what would happen in an ideal world if a 1960s van full of hippies created a commune on a desert island. And I say that quite literally, because the founders did kind of move down to Austin in a VW bus. It was great. It was really, if you know anything about Waldorf schools, that they start much slower as far as academics. They don't expect the kids to read. At least this one didn't before third grade, although all the kids are reading much, much, much earlier on their own. Everything is very physical, and the teacher moves with the students. Now, it's very teacher directed still, but there was a lot of good things that came out of this. Mateo would come home with bumps and bruises, and we wouldn't get a call. So in an age of overprotective parenting, this was a school environment that offered a fair amount of self-directed, self-chosen free play, which is something that, Peter Gray talks about, and I really believe is really important. The kids were getting to be physical. It wasn't all abstractions and rigor. There was a lot of knitting at Waldorf. One of the problems that happened with Waldorf is in fourth grade, mostly through a set of accidental exits on the part of some families that didn't have anything to do with each other, the gender balance in the school got kind of out of whack. And since you're moving together as a group, you're sort of stuck with your class. So in fourth grade, Mateo's class was 26 girls and 5 boys, which might sound pretty good for high school, but if you're a teenage boy, but when you're in fourth grade, it's miserable. So we ended up taking him out of the Waldorf school, and we contemplated where he would end up, which is Acton Academy. But we initially put him in a school that we had a lot of trust in, initially called Cabelli Montessori. And I had a lot of trust in Cabelli Montessori because my good friend Michael Strong and Piazza Cabelli worked together, and I knew he was somebody that, was very progressive in the best possible sense when it came to education. What I didn't realize was that school had merged with another school, and had adopted sort of identity politics philosophy in a major way. And so 4th and 5th grade were fine. When he got into 6th grade, things got weird. And he started being exposed to identity politics and victimhood mentality, and this sense of grievance and privilege, and these sort of political agendas that have nothing to do with education, that are frankly antithetical to the human spirit, that looks at every person as of equal dignity, and that strives for both plurality and pluralism and colorblindness. And that was the opposite of that was happening at his school. And so I was not going to pay for that kind of indoctrination. And so I turned to Acton Academy, where Matteo still goes to school. And Acton was just an incredible experience, and still is. I am an Acton super fan, and he's fortunate. He goes to the original Acton Academy, the one here in Austin, and one of the things that Acton does is, teachers are not permitted to answer questions. Like my good friend Michael, they believe in a radically Socratic approach to education, that's very peer driven. He is as a middle schooler on the high school basketball team, or maybe this was last year, so maybe he technically was in high school, but the whole high school is together in one cohort. But in middle schools, just to give an example of what happens when you unleash self-directed education, Matteo chose to read books that I don't even think I read until college. He read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning and Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and they had genuinely transforming effects on him. He gets it honestly. He's philosophically minded, but he wasn't a kid who was exceptional at school. This isn't someone who I thought was like, oh, he's super academic. Of course, he's going to do great in a self-directed environment. Frankly, he was a little bit of a slacker. So it isn't the case that a self-directed education or a Socratic education requires you to be a grade A student that's incredibly internally motivated. I think that genius that's within us all can be brought out in a lot of different ways, and it certainly worked for him. And so that really lit me up about what is possible. And at the same time, I was reading, books of my own that were really having an impact on me. Jonathan Haidt's Righteous Mind, that talks about sort of the way we arrive at our beliefs. His other book, The Coddling of the American Mind, which really it talks about the ways in which our culture, both parenting, the digital landscape, and this identity politics mentality, have set our kids up for failure. And I've seen this with my son's friends and his cohort, this Gen Z generation, or Gene Twenge calls them iGen. They have higher levels of anxiety, depression, and suicide than any other prior generation. They are more driven by fear than in the past, in ways that are quite stark, even in comparison to young people of prior generations. The other person that played a huge impact on my changing sense of where the real challenges are is Jordan Peterson. Jordan talks about these things head on, this emphasis on psychology, again, on how do you develop the internal locus of control? How do you, through habits of thought and mind and deed, set yourself up to control your life and own your choices and succeed. And one of the things that I was missing from coddling, but that Jordan talks about quite a bit, is the importance of dad. And being a dad for me is the most important job I have. It's the most important impact I will ever make in this world, is the role I play as my son's father. And America has a problem. We lead the world in fatherlessness. 1 in 3 Americans are raised without a biological father, which is shocking. 1 in 4 without a biological step or adoptive father. So it's truly a single mother home. And basically all of social science points to this being incredibly detrimental for our kids. It's frankly a major oversight in Haidt's work on the coddling of the American mind, because the role that fathers play in kids' lives really is an important buttress against this culture of victimhood. And it's not just because dad tends to be the disciplinarian, although that is true. Fathers are much more likely to enforce boundaries on average than mothers, and fathers will put forward boundaries equally, but dads are more likely to enforce the boundary under pressure than moms on average. And that's among several things. Kids that raised with dad present in their lives are also much more likely to be empathetic. Studies that have attempted to measure empathy have actually found that having your father in your life is the single biggest determinant researchers could find for whether or not people would be empathetic. So dads are just really important. And they're also sort of the victim of a culture that has pushed back against masculinity in general and discounted and denigrated dad in particular. And so we thought, as we were embarking on the next phase of Emergent Order as a nonprofit studio, that this was an area where we could step in and offer a perspective and offer a positive story about dad. And so we launched Dad Saves America, a channel dedicated to celebrating dad and to informing, educating, and arming dads with tools, with messages of hope, with examples, and with powerful stories, so that dads can embrace their heroic role and see that role as something that's much more important and impactful for the country than anything they would do in the realm of politics. Politics is basically a cesspool. Nothing good gets done there. But in your personal life, I think that we are called now more than ever to re-embrace the spheres of agency that we actually have. We have these screens that put abstractions in front of us that distract us with worries about things with which we have no control. The result of that is the destruction of agency. Our kids are facing that at an anthropological scale. I call it the fear industrial complex. Everywhere our kids turn, they are confronted with messages that they should be outraged about things they have no control over. And what are they expected to do about this? They're expected to take to the streets. What does that accomplish? No one really knows. The one thing our kids do find when they take to the streets is a brief moment of solidarity, which is useful because people are groupish and we want to feel part of something bigger than ourselves. But all you find in the screen and in politics and activism is being united in negation. As my friend and collaborator on a project together, Martin Gurry, writes in his book, The Revolt of the Public, that we have protest movements of the most highly educated young people, the golden children from around the world, taking to the streets year after year since the birth of the internet, united in negation and destruction. And I love this country, and I believe that we have to consciously raise a future generation that rejects that. And that some of the things that we take for granted, we as middle-aged people now, I'm 44, I didn't have this distraction of right on cue, notification of distraction. we would get home from school and be bored out of our minds and have to make things up. We'd go outside and figure it out, and we would learn the most important lessons of our lives doing that. Today, everything has been made rigorous and abstract in traditional school. And so one of the most fundamental things we want to do at Dad Saves America is promote radically rethinking education. And we've had Michael on the show. We've had the founders, Jeff and Laura from Acton Academy on the show. Anything that can drive dads and parents to pull their kids out of schools that are top down, that are built on this archaic and frankly evil Prussian model that was dedicated to conformity and to raising future cannon fodder, and put them into schools that celebrate their nature as a creator, as a creative, curious being. I think there's nothing more important we can do as dads and as parents than make that choice for our kids and to find the way to do it. And it's not always easy. We are taxed heavily. I'm here in Austin. Our real estate taxes are going up at rates that are genuinely shocking. And a large portion of those funds go to local public schools that have declining enrollment, stagnant standards, a fundamentally broken model, and are antithetical to any form of change, with the possible exception of introducing more and more sort of noxious identity politics. That's the one change that they seem willing to adopt, is sort of a critical theory nonsense. Well, we have to choose differently for our kids. And if the best you can do is agitate for change in your local school board, that is worth doing. But if there's any way for you as a parent to pull your kids from a school that's teaching them negativity, that's destroying their curiosity. Michael shared a statistic with me in one of our conversations that over the course of only a few years in traditional school, the number of questions kids ask on a daily basis goes from over 100, I think it's up to 200 questions, to 0. It's a great measure of curiosity. How many questions do you ask? And again, it is the bedrock of Socratic process, of Socratic practice, is to ask questions. It's how you navigate the world. It's how you grope for the truth, is by asking questions. Well, our schools aren't built for that. And so what we're doing with Dad Saves America is promoting a radically alternative perspective on education. We have a website and a YouTube channel as our two places that we're engaging folks right now. YouTube is our number one platform. We're really in a soft launch and ramping up quickly with new content every week. And I'm excited to talk more about it. But I think what Michael and this conference are doing is critically important. We really do need to liberate our kids from an education system that wasn't built to enrich their lives in the first place and fails to do so on a daily basis. I think the most interesting thing about what comes next is how do we get there from here? Because in talking to the co-founder of Acton Academy, which among the many schools is maybe one of the fastest growing systems, we do have a supply side problem. When the funds that you would put towards a better school are taken from you via taxes, I think truly transformational change is going to require a change in the way this school is funded on a national scale. I mean national as in nationwide, but the reality is that the funding mechanism for school is local. It's at the state level. So I'm of course a big advocate for school choice and for allowing the funds that do get taken from us to be given back, so that we can use them for for the school that works for our kids. I do think we have to be especially on guard as advocates for alternative school to not allow the new models that are being built and the new institutions that are being built to be co-opted in the name of regulation following the funding. And I think that is a risk that we really need to be very, very careful and mindful of, because it's one of the things I have noticed is that I am not merely an advocate for private school. I've encountered problems with private schools as well. And especially when it comes to these the mentality that is being brought to our kids, this identity politics mentality, this critical theory mentality. This is a very deep problem, and it goes all the way back, I think, to where the root. Who's teaching the teachers, and doing some research. That the original this sort of top-down Prussian model dominated the teaching landscape. It dominated the teachers' colleges, the Johns Hopkins and Columbia schools, the Horace Mann and his acolytes, and now getting a degree in education is among the most identity politics soaked degrees you can get. So I think we don't just need school choice. We need to build new institutions for training the next generation of educators so that they don't basically replicate the worst aspects of the public school system in new private schools. This is a really big systematic change that I think I want to see. I want to help instigate and promote. But we have so much work to do. There's engagement on every level to try to make sure as many kids as possible can experience the kind of joy of learning. And nothing's perfect, but when you get to when you have a large measure of agency and choice over what you study, you're going to like it much more. The way I put it to people when they ask about Matteo's school and other schools like it, and Michael's Socratic experience is, well, how many things do you learn that you don't want to learn? I think we create this false dichotomy between the first 25 years of life and the rest. And I think the lessons I've taken at the end of the day is that I became a student in my 20s, in some instances, maybe for the first time, truly choosing my own education path, and it changed my entire life. And I can only imagine what would have happened if I really got to spend much more of my school time doing that, not just relegate my passions to the wee hours of the night. So I'm excited for conferences like this, and I'm happy to talk more with Michael. I know our next session we're going to have a conversation all about this stuff.
I love people who respect time. So you get the award, John, for wrapping up right on time. So yeah, in order to start on time, I would say let's go ahead and leave. And John and I will see you in the breakout session over there. And other people will enjoy listening to Steve Hargadon and Chris Roberts. And we will see you on the other side of the breakout. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Michael.
Welcome.